Hello, everyone, and welcome to another WSI Digital Marketing webinar. Before we kick off today, though, we just want to do a quick audio and visual check to make sure we're coming through loud and clear. So if you can just let us know by typing into the question panel, that would be great. Let me just see here. Awesome. Looks like we're coming through. So great. So thank you all for joining us for WSI's latest digital marketing webinar. This one is entitled 5 Reasons Why Website Accessibility is Good for Your Business and Customers. Now, my name is Cheryl Baldwin. I'm the Director of Marketing at the Corporate Head Office at WSI, and I'll be your host today. But before we dive in, we always like to do a couple little housekeeping items before we get started. So just so you know, yes, the webinar will be recorded, and we do always get questions and requests for our slides afterwards, and we'll be sure to share the slide deck with you as well later on today after the webinar concludes. As with all of our webinars, we will be doing a Q&A as part of our session, so make sure you're submitting your questions via the question panel as well. We have a lot of great information to cover today, and it should really drum up some questions at your end, so we'll try to get to as many of those as we can in the time we have with you. Now, also, if you ever experience any audio issues along the way during the presentation, that can happen sometimes when we have a lot of people joining. Just let us know. We'll try and troubleshoot those for you, or maybe switch back and forth between the phone and the audio options you have available to you. So just some quick info on WSI as well. We've been around for more than 25 years now, and in that time, we have helped over 100,000 businesses worldwide and across various industries with their digital marketing strategies. And, you know, here at our end, our goal at WSI is really to help businesses navigate the sometimes complex digital marketing landscape. And one of the ways we do that is through webinars like these, where we educate and share best practices around specific digital marketing topics. And today, as I mentioned, our topic will focus on website accessibility, which really at its core is about ensuring that every individual that visits your website can use your website effectively and also consume your web content. I mean, the reality is that despite millions of internet users having a disability that can impact their ability to navigate a website, very few businesses are still not taking the necessary steps to ensure every individual can use their site properly. And with laws and regulations on website accessibility increasing year over year, you need to start making your website's level of accessibility and usability a core part as well as a priority of your digital marketing strategy. So, joining us today as our webinar presenter to talk more on this topic, why it's important, how it can impact your business in other ways, and even how you can start putting a plan together, is Eric Cook, our very own, one of our very own WSI digital marketing consultants. Now, Eric is actually a former 15-year community bank executive, and he now serves the financial industry as a digital strategist and award-winning web designer, and has been with WSI since 2007. Eric's an accomplished speaker, always traveling around, now a little bit more that he can, speaking on the benefits of digital marketing, as well as this key topic of website accessibility. Eric has also written a chapter in each of our 3 Digital Minds book, and he authored our conversational marketing chapter in our current book, Digital Minds, A Strategic Approach to Connecting and Engaging with Your Customers Online. So I know he's excited to share a lot of information on website accessibility with you today. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Eric.
Hey, thanks, Cheryl. I feel like I should grab the book off of my shelf back there and put it up. I've got all 3 of them. So yeah, that was certainly an honor to be part of that and to join many of the other WSI thought leaders from around the world on helping to keep businesses and organizations aware of what's going on in the world of digital. So web accessibility is something that's near and dear to my heart. For many years, we have been addressing this with our client, as you can tell from my bio and introduction that Cheryl so eloquently provided. I spend a lot of my time in the banking space, and that is one of the industries that has been targeted by accessibility lawsuits. And we're going to talk about that and my accelerated learning curve on this issue. But before we get started, I'm going to have Cheryl in just a little bit open up a poll, but I'd like to get those of you that are joining live, I'd like to get a sense of your level of comfort or preparedness or familiarity with the topic of web accessibility. And in just a quick minute, we're going to see the poll that's going to come up, but I'm curious on where you fall in that regard. Are you just starting to investigate the issue and you just heard about it because one of my WSI colleagues invited you to today's webinar, or are you all the way to the bottom where you've gone through, retooled your website, redone your code, looked at W3C standards and web content accessibility guidelines, and you're 2.1 level AA compliant, ready for 2.2 to come along and be compliant there. So we'll let this stay up for just a little while longer. I'm very curious to see what the results are going to show.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to give everyone just a few more seconds, maybe 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Okay, I'm going to close it and then I'm going to share the results.
All right.
Can you see that, Eric?
I can. So it looks like a majority, over 60%, starting to investigate, heard about it, but need help building a plan. Some of you have moved forward and had your website tested, so you know where the risks are, which is good. There's a process where we're now consciously incompetent. A lot of you at the beginning are unconsciously, we don't know what we don't know, and that's why you're here. So the purple ones have had their site tested. They know what their risks are. Not a lot of people have engaged their website partner on starting remediation, which is an important component to getting things fixed, because a lot of these aren't necessarily things that a business owner is able to do themselves. They tend to be a little bit technical in nature. There's some technology we'll talk about that makes that a little bit easier. But it's good to see almost 20% of you feel that you are all set, you're level AA compliant, and that's awesome. So we'd like to get that number a whole lot higher, obviously, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So if we take a look at our agenda for what we're going to talk about, we've got really 5 areas here. We're going to briefly go over what website accessibility is so that we're all really talking from the same starting point. We're going to talk about why accessibility is important. Again, not just at the business level, but at your customers. It also helps insulate you from legal risk and reputational risk. We're going to chat a little bit about the various elements, and there's a lot of them, so we're not going to be able to get to every single one of them in the 45 minutes we've got reserved for today's webinar. But some of the high-level elements that impact web accessibility. Then we're going to chat about the advantages and the benefits of having an accessible website. Not only are the things that Cheryl mentioned of making sure that everyone that visits you is able to engage and consume your content, but that could potentially open you up to new market areas that'll have some SEO benefit. There's a number of extra benefits that we'll talk about. And then finally, some recommendations and next steps. WSI has actually created a really good checklist. You are here because one of my fabulous colleagues from the WSI family has invited you. We've got some resources that we're making available to provide assistance to help you with that review of the site, or some checklists to make sure that you're protected. So the good news is you're in good hands if you're here as a result of a WSI. So web accessibility, and I'm not going to read this verbatim, but if we take a look at W3C, which is the World Wide Web Consortium, which really is responsible for governing web content accessibility and their initiative, it's really talking about websites and tools and technology. So think about apps and anything that's digital, making sure that it is able to be used and consumed and engaged and experienced with an individual that may have some form of a disability. And most of the time people think of a disability as being just somebody that's blind, but there's a lot of other disabilities we need to be concerned about. What brought this concept to my attention was back in 2015, when web accessibility really started to becoming an issue. One of our banks actually received a demand letter from a law firm claiming that they're representing an individual that was purporting disability discrimination. And being that I was part of the banking industry back in the day when we introduced ATM machines for cash outside of normal banking hours, we were not unfamiliar with this accessibility lawsuit initiative, because many financial institutions received similar demand letters from law firms representing individuals that claim disability discrimination because they couldn't use an ATM machine. And now you see a lot of ATM machines have Braille keyboards, they have audio jacks for headphones. So if someone with a disability wants to go to an ATM machine and they want to get cash out, but they want to do it themselves and they don't want to tell somebody their PIN number or have somebody read it off their screen, and they maintain their privacy, that was a familiarity. Now, some of those lawsuits were frivolous in nature. Some of those lawsuits were just attorneys making an effort to try to generate revenue, and it was proven that a lot of the plaintiffs really weren't benefiting from that. So there's a sense that some of that was going on when these demand letters were being sent out as it relates to the website. But the reality is everyone should be able to use an ATM. Everyone should be able to get online and order products and goods and services and consume content. And that really is at the heart of what we're talking about. So when we think about the areas of disability, I mentioned the visual is really one that we think of, and I put that at the last point here, only because we're all thinking of, well, how does a blind person or a visually impaired person navigate a website? But there's also other elements. So video is becoming very popular, auditory, closed captioning, if you've got elements that provide any sort of audio feedback. Cognitive, so learning disabilities, somebody might visit your website and they may have low reading level, they may have dyslexia, so it's difficult for them to be able to comprehend the words on the screen, but yet the important instructions that you have on your website are in a big giant wall of text. So you might need to provide an audio option for somebody that has a learning disability to be able to still understand what it's talking about. Neurological, those could be things where you're sensitive to light or tremors or other sorts of reactions from video stimulus that provides an opportunity for you to maybe slip into a seizure, which we obviously don't want. Physical, sometimes it's referred to as ambulatory. Somebody is a quadriplegic and they're using something like a mouth stick or a pointer. Does your website provide the ability to navigate based off of keyboard or quick insert, or do you have to have a mouse or have to be able to use your hands? There's speech, where some websites are now accepting speech, or some platforms are accepting speech. You see a lot of television services now that have speech-enabled remote controls, where you can talk into your remote control and ask it to play the latest movie or TV show. What if somebody doesn't have vocal capabilities? How do you allow for that individual to still navigate your site? And then lastly, visual. It's not just people that are blind. It could be someone that has glaucoma. It could be an older individual that just has low visual capability. It could be red-green color blindness, and there's not a differentiation between the color and contrast of your website. So there's a number of elements, and each of these has varying depths of severity, as you can well imagine. I'm not a medical professional, but as I've reviewed the requirements, you can see each of these certainly has their own nuances that we need to be aware of. So let's talk about, if you're not classified as a disabled individual and you don't necessarily have a quantifiable disability, there are other areas that would necessitate you to pay attention to make sure people are visiting your website. For example, when we start getting on mobile devices and we start talking about smaller screens. I turned 51 this year. I'm using readers and I had to increase my number on my readers because things are getting a lot smaller. Not really, things are staying the same size, but they seem like they're getting a lot smaller. So if we're producing content on smaller screens, mobile watches, mobile devices, do we have the ability for visitors to be able to pinch and zoom and increase and expand, or is it what it is? And people that are maybe losing their eyesight or needing stronger readers aren't just simply going to be able to consume their content. We talk about older individuals, their needs are changing. They might not necessarily have full loss of ambulatory control. but they may not be really good with a mouse. They might not be comfortable with a touchpad on a laptop computer. They might be having issues with their vision. So due to aging, that could be a concern. And certainly there is a growing aging population that we need to be aware of. Temporary disabilities. I go out on my mountain bike and I break my arm, and how am I going to type? How am I going to browse? Something happens. While it's not a permanent disability, it is certainly going to hamper my ability to browse the internet, and we need to be able to take consideration there for those types of instances. We've also got situational limitations. So if I'm outside, for example, here with bright sunlight, if I can't see the screen, I don't have the ability for my web browser on my mobile device to be able to impact the color and contrast, or to be able to increase or decrease. If for whatever reason your website's built with the inability to support some of the native functionalities of these devices or other sorts of situational elements, a lot of it is, if I'm in a loud, noisy area, I might want to make sure closed captioning comes on by default or automatically so I can hear it. Now, that's also a really good thing if you're using closed captioning, because most people browse social media with the audio turned off. And if it's a message that you really want to be seen, not only is it an accessibility, but it'll also help you make sure that your video gets noticed and starts to be consumed, so somebody can be intrigued to actually turn on the video and hear what you have to say. And finally, and I've lived this for way too many years of my life, slow internet, not being able to afford high expensive bandwidth. We like to think here in the United States that that's not an issue, but I can tell you for many, many years, I lived in a home that was a beautiful house in a beautiful setting, and I struggled extensively with internet connectivity, even as a digital marketing consultant for 14 years. And visiting a website that has super high image resolution pictures and lots of things going on, it would take a long time. So we need to be aware that there are people that are still using slower connectivity. Everybody's not connecting through a fiber optic pipe at their home office to be able to consume content. Some of what's happened over the last year with COVID and people working from home has also brought this to light, where not everybody has the same connectivity that they had in the office, and all of a sudden their experience of the internet isn't what it was when they were sitting in the office and they had, gigabit Ethernet connectivity. So next slide, please. We're going to share some statistics as to why it's important. And these numbers tell a story and are ones that you need to make sure are part of your understanding of why this is so important. Cheryl provided some information in her introduction, but you can see the numbers of people within the world, actually, according to the World Health Organization, that have some form of a disability, the US population. So these are all really important numbers to keep in mind as you're going back and saying, is this something that we really need to worry about? How pervasive does this really need to be attended to on our behalf? Is it really something that affects us? The answer to all of those is yes. It does affect you. It does impact you. And so if we, take a minute to take in these statistics, we've got one more slide with a few more statistics on it as well that we're going to go ahead and take a look at. So even some more statistics talking about, the aging population was one of the non-disability but yet limiting factors that we mentioned too. And then even some international statistics. It's certainly, even though I reside here in the United States, I know we've got a lot of international friends joining today's webinar and likely will be watching it down the road. It's not something that is just local to us here in the US. This is a global issue. So we want to make sure that we're very aware of all of these statistics, put them in with records of meetings, have discussions about them. One of the checklist items that you'll see if you get access to the checklist really talks about demonstrating a paper trail, even if that's a digital paper trail, of your discussion and conversations around this issue, should you ever fall victim to a lawsuit. So speaking of lawsuits, I believe that's our next slide. Over the last 2 years, lawsuits have increased and they continue to increase. And we think of, and I mentioned it earlier, the digitization of society, the work from home, more and more organizations pushing their products and services electronically because their locations closed, their doors shut, it was online only or pickup and delivery. Well, how are you going to order that food from the restaurant? Most of the time it's an app or visit the website. Does that have the ability to provide a digital accessible experience, or is it the same website that's been around for several years and you've never really had to think about it? Now you've got a whole nother constituent base of individuals that are trying to use that technology. The other thing that is important to note is people, and at the next slide, people that may get sued, they're coming back, because what happens, unlike traditional accessibility, and I was involved in a number of remodeling projects at the bank where I worked at for several years, and I am very familiar with the requirements of building a physical location and why accessibility is important. You need to make sure that the pull strength on the door is a certain poundage. You need to make sure that the ramps are a certain slope so that people with wheelchairs can get up, or walkers. You need to make sure hallways are a certain width, drinking fountains are a certain height off the ground. And once those are created and you build it and you get approved by the building inspector and they make sure that you're meeting the current accessibility code, the building's not shifting and changing. The doors aren't dynamically modifying. The hallways aren't shifting and changing in direction and size. The drinking fountain isn't changing the distance it sits from the floor. A building is a static entity. But in the digital space, we're adding content all the time. New blog posts, new video content, new articles, audio, social media. We're bringing on new vendors, new partnerships, new services. So it is a dynamic environment that requires us to not just do it right the first time, or do it right initially, or do it right now, but we have to make sure we've got a plan in place so that we're doing it right on a continual basis, because things will change, things will shift, things will morph. So these are all the elements that impact website accessibility. And so you think of the content that people are consuming, the text, the images, the video, the graphics, the infographics, the audio files, the user agents that people are using. Am I interacting with a smartphone, a mobile watch, a tablet, a laptop, a big screen TV? How am I interacting, and how do those provide an accessible experience? Individuals with disabilities will use what's referred to as assistive technology. So they're using things like screen readers and Braille translation services and other sorts of technology that visits the website on their behalf, and it gathers that information, collects the data from the back end of the code, and then regurgitates that to the user so that it tells them what's there. And if it just says home banner 1 instead of little kids with a piggy bank saving for their future, the individual is not going to know what home banner 1 means, because assistive technology can't interpret, it doesn't understand. We need to make sure that that type of technology is being trained and educated by the code that we're putting into our website. The user itself, we've talked about this already, but their experience, their capabilities, their limitations, those are very important. From a development perspective, how we're building things, not just on the web, but applications and downloadable apps. We're using authoring tools. If we have individuals that are working for us, we need to make sure that those authoring tools are able to be used by disabled employees, so that it's not just the front end users themselves that we're expecting our customers to interpret, but who's to say that we don't necessarily need to make our tools accessible for employees to be able to use and deploy, because this segment of the population also is an employable segment of the population just as much as a consumer buying products and services. And then lastly, the evaluation tools that are out there that are providing us with input and guidance on what things it's detecting, where we need to make remediation. All those sorts of things are very important. And the good news is your WSI consultant has access to some really amazing tools that they can help you with. So if you're in that small percentage where you've not engaged someone to help you with this, go back to the consultant that invited you to this webinar and said, okay, Eric's convinced me, now how can you help? And let them do their job and help you. So the 5 benefits revealed really revolve around, making sure that, one, doing this properly helps you reduce your legal risk. You have the ability, not because you're only doing this because you want to avoid the threat of a lawsuit, but in the business world, unfortunately, what I've heard is, while the importance of serving the customer is certainly one that I feel is the highest, a lot of times it's the penalty of legal risk that really is the one that gets a business off of their chair and starts making efforts to make a difference. The second item that is a benefit is it improves your search optimization. You probably have heard your SEO consultant mention to you things like SEO or web presence optimization or advanced SEO, ASEO, but all of those are elements that allow for the browser to be able to communicate to things like search engines and Google to consume your content and make sure that you are putting your best foot forward and being found for searches when people are looking for products and services. The better we educate these browsers and the devices on what we're doing to help with individuals with disabilities, the better the search engines are going to have when they decide that they need to understand what it is that we do and how we can serve our customers. So there's some SEO benefits there. It's going to make your overall user experience better while you'll implement things that might be specifically to address an individual with a disability. For the able-bodied visitor that doesn't have that disability, that experience might actually be a better experience in the end anyway. So we're going to overall, if nothing else, it's going to cause us to revisit the user experience and how we can improve it. We're going to position the brand as one that values inclusivity. And I think that is also a very important thing, that it gives us the ability to proactively acknowledge the fact that people of all variety of abilities are out there needing products and services, and we want to be an organization that's able to support them, to serve them, that could potentially even open you up to some additional revenue stream, which is kind of a dovetail into the last and the final one, where now you're going to be exposed to an even larger consumer audience. I did a webinar on accessibility many, many years ago. I actually had somebody from the Department of Justice who was in charge of their accessibility division, and an individual who was blind, who is an advocate, speaks at conferences. And he shared on that webinar that he actually uses, at that point in time, he does all of his banking with a bank located in the Netherlands, despite the fact that he resided here in the United States, because there was not one financial institution that he had tried that had an accessible online banking experience. He wanted to transfer $100 and it transferred $1,000, or vice versa. There was no platform that he could use, and so he wasn't able to do business. Imagine if you were a financial institution that had the ability to serve those customers. That would create a larger audience for you to serve. Now, I suspect that that's no longer the case, because that webinar has been several years, but that opens you up to an entirely new group of customer base, an entirely new revenue stream. And I've yet to met a business, even nonprofits, that aren't concerned about revenue and growing that income number. So now, yes, bonus tip. Thank you so much for that little reminder. I almost forgot that I put that on there. So bonus tip, I mentioned online banking. I'll just briefly talk about this because it may be somewhat industry specific, but if your website has any third-party services that you're using to help provide services to your customers and your visitors, like a scheduling service, like an application platform, like a reservation, or an e-commerce shopping cart, you're going to want to double check with those third-party services, because those likely are outside of your and your web team's control. But if they're providing services to your customers, it's still ultimately your responsibility. One of the things that the individual from the Department of Justice said, at least here in the United States, is you cannot contract away your responsibility or your liability for accessibility. So just because, oh, that's our credit card processor, or that's so-and-so, that's a different system, it's ultimately still your responsibility. So make sure that you know who they are, that you've reached out and you've had conversations with them to determine what their plan of attack is. All right, now I think we can switch. So one of the tools that we use quite often here with our office, because this is one of the tools that had started gaining a tremendous amount of traction in the banking and financial services space, is what's referred to as an overlay technology from the folks at AudioEye. Now, there's a number of tools out there, and I think when I originally looked and was trying to find a solution to help me help my customers, when I went to the W3C at that time, there was almost 100 different tools and providers of services that would work with accessibility. So there's no shortage. And so you're certainly free to view all of those and to check. But AudioEye provides a unique solution, and we're really excited that they've become a partner of ours, because I've used them even before WSI came on board as an officially endorsed partner of ours. But AudioEye has addressed this issue with a little bit of a technology approach, with an overlay and some technology that when you visit a website, you can actually change and modify things like the font. So I mentioned cognitively disabled, learning disability individuals that might have dyslexia. Well, there's an option within AudioEye where I can click a button and within literally 5 seconds convert all of the text on my website to the open dyslexic font, which makes it much easier for an individual with dyslexia to read content on a page based off of how the font is actually designed. And so there's a number of other elements that AudioEye provides that provide us the ability to implement it very quickly without having to necessarily get into all the source code and retool everything. So from a time and a cost perspective, it's a pretty economical option. There's a dashboard that provides some feedback as to your level of preparedness, the items that have been fixed, the items that are still waiting to be fixed. And the nice part about an AudioEye or a solution like it that's providing ongoing service is it's that, hey, this site is protected by, and if an attorney or somebody stops by, they'll see that, and that'll serve as evidence that you're taking this issue seriously and that you are taking efforts in order to provide an accessible experience for your visitors. So we've got a wrap-up slide here. Recommendations and next steps. This 90-day accessibility checklist, I worked closely with the corporate team and Cheryl, and they took some ideas and made them really pretty, which is what they do great, but some really good ideas based off of some of the best practices we've been using for our financial institution clients and making sure that you are prepared. So research, document, record, make sure that you put this in the notes if you have formal minutes, if you have just some way. So if 6 months from now you get a demand letter, being able to produce, hey, we went to a webinar, we did some investigation, we talked with our consultant. If you're standing before a judge who needs to determine whether or not you're taking this issue seriously, having a documented conversation stream and making decisions and looking at your risk is going to certainly bode better for you than if this appears to be the first time that you've ever heard about it. Get your website tested. Again, your WSI consultant can help you with that. And they can certainly provide you with assistance on implementing some remediation or building a plan to risk assess where the high level things need to be taken care of first. And then lastly, whether you use a tool like AudioEye or some other platform that provides assistive ongoing technology, or you just put it in your calendar for every month, every quarter, depending on how often content on your website changes, don't just think that this is a one and done. This isn't a drinking fountain X number of inches above the floor that's never going to change. This is a dynamic, living, breathing digital organism that you need to make sure you're going back and checking on a regular basis. And the more content that you produce and the more changes that you make and the more dynamic you make your website, which ultimately is more beneficial to the customer, the more often you're going to need to check things and make sure that you're not inadvertently providing inaccessible information for those who should be able to consume your content. So last slide, I think reach out to your consultant, talk to us. We are here to help.
For sure. And I mean, depending on, I would say, depending on, the makeup of your team at your business, if you need help in this area, that's where a WSI consultant can step in. And if you want to get your hands on that 90-day web accessibility checklist, even if just to leverage at your end, reach out and we can make sure you get that. And if you aren't currently connected with a WSI consultant, you can reach out to contact at WSI World and we'll put you in contact with one and get you what you need. But we have lots of great comments and questions coming through. So let's go into Q&A, because I know that there's a lot of additional things and information we can definitely share and talk about. I guess my first one would be just stemming off of, oh, getting some feedback, some conversation here around getting what if you get a legal letter, Eric? What do you do? What would you recommend if a business all of a sudden gets this handed to them? What is their immediate next step?
So it's not run for the hills or lock the doors or hide under the bed. That's not what you want to do. I would make sure that, obviously you're going to get it to your attorney. I would make sure that you don't respond and acknowledge or deny anything. I would certainly make sure that you get your legal counsel involved. I would ensure that the documentation that you have around the issue of accessibility, any tests that you've had done, any notes from meetings that you've attended, links to recorded webinars such as this, I would start collecting that information to make sure that you're providing evidence to the law firm that has sent you the demand letter that indeed it's not the case. While maybe you're not 100% compliant, the reality is nobody can snap their fingers and make that happen. And while I'm not an attorney myself, I have to believe that if there's a show of best faith and an awareness of the issue, and you're taking steps as best you can based off of your organization's budget, your organization's manpower, your organization's access to technical capabilities, if you're putting forth something where you're doing, even if it's just a little bit every month, that in of itself, I think, will help you at least respond to that. So you might get a little more breathing room, you might get a little more leniency and not be slapped with, a requirement to completely retool. If you go online and you Google web accessibility lawsuits, you can certainly read some horror stories, six-figure and on findings that are requiring businesses to completely redo everything. That's not what you want. So hopefully that helps.
Awesome. You did mention a tip there around if you have external apps on your website, booking systems, reservation systems, even like potentially, I guess, chat bots or other things that are like where people can interact, and they're being provided by someone else. How do you start those conversations with those third-party vendors to make sure they're equally staying accessible?
Sure. So let's pretend it's a chat bot. So I'm a business owner. I get done listening to this webinar. I have a chat bot on my website. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to reach out to the chatbot provider. Maybe it's a salesperson, maybe your WSI consultant brought it to your attention. But I would reach out and say, hey, I just sat through this webinar. I now am very aware of the things that I need to be thinking about as it relates to web accessibility. We've identified you as being a vendor providing digital services to our online customers and site visitors. And as such, we need for you to tell us what your accessibility preparedness is. Is this something that you've addressed? Is this something that you are addressing? Is this something that you're not going to address? And make sure that you get that documented. I will tell you, in the banking space, there are core providing banking services that are running back-end banking systems and online banking services that have responded, until this is formal law, we're not really going to take any effort. And it doesn't mean that you still can't get sued, because that's happening. And what happens if you get a response like that, some of those businesses and banks have drafted up separate agreements or addendums to say, okay, then I need you to sign this, and you'll probably want to get your attorney involved. But this is for you to acknowledge, Mr. Chatbot or Mr. Booking System, that if we do get sued, and we do get sued because the deficiency of your platform, you are agreeing to reimburse us with any and all legal damages and any other reputational costs because it's out of your control. And if they're not willing to sign that and stand behind it, then you may need to look at either discontinuing that service or finding an alternative vendor, or at the end of the day, you can agree to assume the risk and just hope that that's not going to happen. But it is a conversation you need to have, and it's a conversation you need to have with everybody that's providing services. Or you'll get into a situation where, oh, you never asked us and we were never told this was an issue and sorry, we can't help you. And then you're footing the bill for the entire lawsuit. And that's definitely not what you want. More of a teamwork approach than an accusatory approach, I think is going to be the way you want to go with this, but definitely reach out.
Awesome. We have a question here because in our poll, we put one of the options was that you've reached a certain level, WCAG 2.2 level. And we know there's different levels of accessibility.
2.1.
2.1, sorry. We know that there's different levels of accessibility. There's A, there's AA, and there's AAA. Can you just maybe just walk through those different levels and maybe also like what levels should businesses be striving for?
Yep. So I'll answer your last question first, and then I'll jump in and I'll do your first question last. What is generally accepted in the industry, unless you're specifically targeting individuals with disabilities with your services, is WCAG, which stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG 2.1, level AA. A is the bare minimum, AA is kind of middle of the road, and AAA compliance is very invasive. And I've not met a lot of organizations that have gone for AAA compliance, again, unless they're a vendor specifically selling into the accessibility and the disability community. To back that up, WCAG 2.1 was recently introduced within the last probably year to 2 years. Prior to that, it was WCAG 2.0, which was originally introduced back in 2008. So we were running off the same accessibility guidelines for 10 years. Imagine how much technology had changed and evolved over 10 years since 2008 to 2018. So the mobile browser, internet connectivity, pervasiveness of high-speed wireless, a lot of things changed. So when 2.1 came out, it introduced elements related to more of the mobile device. There is already works of creating the next level 2.2, which is available for review. It's likely going to be released later this fall. That's introducing another set of requirements because of the smaller screens, the mobile watches, the smart devices. There's a whole nother plethora of digital engagement opportunities that we need to be aware of. What just jumped into my head is, the Samsung smart refrigerator with a flat screen and the ability for it to send you an email when you're low on milk. Samsung needs to figure out how to make sure that that's an accessible device. It's not a website, it's not a computer, it's not a mobile device, but it's a digital engagement device that needs to have accessibility built within it. And if there's instructions and buttons that you got to push, how do you make that accessible? Those are all the things that are in this onion as we peel it back that we need to be aware of.
Awesome. And I know like when you're running tests on your website or stuff like that, they'll normally highlight some of these elements and where you're sitting, plus identify what fixes are more critical, what are kind of ones you need to kind of maybe are your second priority and stuff like that too.
Absolutely. It's you probably have all heard the, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. You can't shove it in your mouth entirely, it just won't fit. When you get a report, it's going to feel like somebody just put an elephant in front of you with a knife and fork and it's time to dig in. You have to prioritize and identify the high level items. There's likely elements that are persistent across your entire website because they're in the header or the footer. So you could bang those out and take care of those. And that's going to eliminate a lot of exposure because it's across every single page on every single on your website. So you just look at that and prioritize one bite at a time, showing progress. Doesn't have to be progress, not perfection, is a mantra I'm trying to embrace more in my own personal life. And it's really applicable in this instance as well.
Awesome. Is this something from your perspective that at a business level, like someone should own at the business level, or is it a cross-functional thing? Or what are your thoughts on that?
So, I mean, at the end of the day, I think it needs to be owned by an individual, because if you don't have a point of responsibility, if everybody's responsible, then nobody's responsible. Well, I thought Cheryl was going to do it. Well, I thought Eric was going to do it. I don't know. So someone needs to own this. Most of the time, it's whoever manages the website, probably digital, customer experience, customer service, technology. But it also doesn't mean that that individual has to do this in a vacuum, because everyone in the organization needs to understand the severity and magnitude of this issue. So senior management needs to sit in. A president and CEO can't just say, well, that's an IT issue, I'm not going to worry about it, because it's a business risk, it's an exposure, potential liability. They're not going to be the ones getting in and coding and fixing the stuff behind the scenes. But like anything else that's important to the business risk and reputation of the organization, they need to be aware of it. And even if it's just briefing that individual on a high level on a quarterly basis, building some sort of a committee that you document and you put who the members are and you create reoccurring minutes is one more documentation process that validates your level of attention and your perceived importance of this issue should you get drug into a lawsuit down the road.
Awesome. Well, I'm just noticing we're at our 45, so that's all the
How
time
did
we're
that
gonna.
happen?
I
Time
know, I
flies.
know. So that's all the time we have for the Q&A, but if we didn't get to your question, reach out to your consultant so that you can get those questions answered, or if something else pops up as you're going through the guide and just mulling this over a little bit more at your end. But if you ever want to learn more on digital marketing and other tactics, again, make sure that you check out our book, Digital Mind, A Strategic Approach to Connecting and Engaging with Your Customers Online. It is available on Amazon. It really breaks down each component nicely, chapter by chapter, and has some great authors in it as well. And so, thanks again. I just want to thank everyone for joining us. We hope you found this information valuable. Again, if you want to get that 90-day web accessibility checklist, reach out so we can get that into your hands. And we hope to see you on a next WSI client webinar. Our next one actually is going to be on July 28th, where we're going to be talking more about Facebook advertising, how you can get more and even better leads from your Facebook campaign. So until then, Eric, thanks so much for spending time with us today to share your
My
expertise on
pleasure.
the topic. Thank
My
you all for
pleasure.
joining us. We hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye all.
Bye, everybody.